My name is Clara Me Thompson, and for 38 years, my world has been the quiet, steady hum of Willow Creek, Oregon. Life here is measured in seasons, not seconds. The damp smell of pine after a morning rain, the low hum of conversation in my bookstore, the predictable chime of the bell above the door, these are the things that have always defined my existence. I own a shop called the Quill and Compass, a legacy left to me by my parents, who inherited it from my grandfather. It's more than a business. It's a time capsule filled with the scent of old paper, leather, and brewing tea. My life is small, contained, and peaceful, just the way I like it. I live in the small 2-story house attached to the shop, the same house I grew up in. My garden out back, with its unruly roses and stubborn lavender, is my private sanctuary. I'm not lonely, but I am alone, and there's a quiet strength in that. Or at least, I thought there was, until the man in the dark green sedan appeared. It started on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary it was completely forgettable until it was. A dented, forest green sedan, the kind you see in old movies right before something bad happens, parked on the street directly across from my house. I didn't think much of it at first. Willow Creek is small, but people have visitors. But the car just sat there, all day. I'd glance out the shop window while restocking the history section, and it would be there. I'd look up from my lunch in the kitchen, and through the window, I could see its dull reflection in the wet street. In the evening, as I locked up, its silhouette remained under the pale glow of the street lamp. A man was inside. I could see his shape behind the wheel, but he never got out. He just sat. The next day, he was back, and the day after that. A week passed like this. The car became a fixed object in my view, a silent, brooding presence that started to fray the edges of my peaceful world. He wasn't doing anything illegal, just parking on a public street. But it felt like a violation. It was the stillness of it, the unnerving focus. I could feel his eyes on my house, on my shop, on me, even when I couldn't see them. I started to change my routine. I pulled the shades down in the living room. I used the back door more often, scurrying through my garden like a frightened rabbit. The comfort of my home was evaporating, replaced by a low-grade, constant anxiety. My nemesis had a face, but no name yet. He was tall, gaunt, with dark, hollow-looking eyes and greasy hair that hung in strings around his ears. One afternoon, I saw him clearly as he leaned his head against the driver's side window. He looked like a man hollowed out by resentment. That day, something changed. He got out of the car. He didn't approach my house or my shop. He just stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, and stared. Not at the shop, but at the house. My house. He had a small, grim smile on his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret you don't. That's when the real fear kicked in. This wasn't random. This was personal. That evening, I called Sheriff Brody. Brody is a good man, a few years older than me. We went to high school together, and he buys mystery novels from my shop for his wife every Christmas. Clara Me, he said, his voice kind but weary. I hear you. It's creepy, I'll give you that. But he's not breaking any laws. I can go have a talk with him, but if he says he's just enjoying the view, there's not a thing I can do. Brody did talk to him. I watched from behind my curtains. The man just shrugged, smiled that same horrible smile, and after Brody left, he got back in his car and continued to stare. The problem was clear. A stranger was systematically dismantling my sense of security, and the very laws meant to protect me were shielding him instead. My world was no longer my own. A shadow had fallen over it, and that shadow had a name, as I would soon find out. His name was Marcus Thorne, and he had come to Willow Creek to take everything from me. The silent siege continued, and with each passing day, the screws of tension tightened. I decided I couldn't live like a prisoner in my own home. My first real attempt to solve the problem was to fortify my world. I spent a significant chunk of my savings on a state-of-the-art security system. Cameras were mounted at every corner of the house and shop, their little red lights blinking in the dusk like angry eyes staring back at him. I thought maybe the sight of them, the knowledge of being recorded, would be enough to deter him. It was. In fact, he seemed to enjoy it. The day after the cameras went up, he started performing for them. He would get out of his car and do slow, deliberate stretches, always facing a camera. He'd clean his windshield with meticulous care, his movements exaggerated and mocking. He was turning my defense into a stage for his psychological theater. Then the gifts started. They were small things, designed to feel both insignificant and deeply menacing. The first was a single, rusty railroad spike left perfectly centered on my welcome mat. The next week, it was a child's porcelain doll, its face cracked and one eye missing, propped up against my garden gate. My beautiful roses seemed to wilt in its presence. I showed the camera footage to Sheriff Brody. "It's littering, Clara me," he sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Disturbing littering, but still. I can't arrest a man for leaving a doll on your gate." Each time I called, I could hear the helplessness in Brody's voice, and it mirrored my own. I was documenting my own haunting, and no one could stop it. My business, the quill and compass, my sanctuary, became the next front in his war. A trickle of one-star online reviews began to appear. They were written in a strange, stilted prose. "The owner seems agitated and paranoid. I felt very uncomfortable in the store." Another said, "There's a strange atmosphere in this place. The woman who runs it was watching me the whole time. Very creepy." These were lies, of course. I prided myself on my warm, welcoming shop. But mud sticks. I saw familiar faces hesitate at the door. I overheard whispers in the grocery store aisle. Mrs. Gable, who had been buying gardening books from me for 20 years, started sending her husband instead. Marcus was poisoning my reputation in the town that was my lifeblood. He was isolating me, turning my community against me with carefully planted seeds of doubt. I realized I couldn't just defend, I had to attack. I had to understand why he was doing this. I am a bookseller, a researcher at heart. The answer, I felt, had to be in the past. I closed the shop for a few days, putting a "closed for inventory" sign on the door, and descended into the town archives in the basement of the library. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light as I pulled out heavy ledgers and boxes of old property deeds. I spent hours poring over microfilm, my eyes burning from the screen's glow. And then I found it. a deed of sale for my property, dated 1955. The seller was a man named Silas Thorne. The buyer was my grandfather, Arthur Thompson. Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't random at all. This was generational. I dug deeper, searching old newspaper articles from that era. I found a few small mentions of Silas Thorne. He was a logger who had fallen on hard times. There were whispers of a gambling problem. The prevailing town legend, a story I'd half heard as a child, was that my grandfather had won the property from Silas Thorne in a high-stakes poker game. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a surge of foolish confidence. I had the reason. Now I could confront him. The next morning, I marched across the street. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but I kept my chin high. Marcus Thorne was wiping down his dashboard. He looked up as I approached, and that chilling, knowing smile spread across his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. "I know who you are," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Your name is Marcus Thorne. Your grandfather was Silas Thorne. This is about the property, isn't it? About a poker game 60 years ago." He leaned back against his car, feigning surprise. Well, the little librarian did her homework. Then his expression hardened, the mock pleasantness falling away to reveal something cold and ugly. My grandfather didn't just lose a poker game. Your grandfather, Arthur Thompson, cheated him. He got him drunk, took advantage of his situation, and stole his home, his land, his future. My family was ruined, cast out, while your family built a comfortable life on our stolen legacy. I'm not here for a game, Miss Thompson. I'm here for justice. I'm here to reclaim what is rightfully mine. He spoke with the conviction of a true believer. He laid out his demand. I was to sell him the house and the shop for a fraction of its market value, a symbolic price to right the historical wrong. "Or what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Or I will continue to remind this town, and you every single day, that you are living in a thief's house," he said softly. "I will dismantle your life piece by piece until you have nothing left but the dust and shame your grandfather left mine." I refused. I told him he was delusional, that he was harassing me based on a bitter family myth. I walked away, feeling shaken but righteous. That was my biggest mistake. My refusal transformed him from a passive tormentor into an active destroyer. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. Marcus Thorne was suing me for the deed to the property, citing a fraudulent historical transfer. It was a frivolous, baseless claim, but it was real. It meant lawyers, depositions, and draining my savings to defend myself against a ghost story. He escalated his campaign in town. He was no longer a silent watcher. He was a victim, a man seeking justice. He told his twisted story in the diner, in the post office, at the hardware store. He was charming, convincing, and pitiable. He painted me as the cold-hearted descendant of a villain, clinging to ill-gotten gains. The town, once my bedrock, began to crack. Some people looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. My sales at the Quill and Compass plummeted. The bell above the door, once a cheerful announcement of a friend's arrival, now chimed so infrequently that its silence became a roar in my ears. I was becoming the paranoid, agitated woman his fake reviews described. I stopped sleeping. Every creak of the old house was him trying to get in. Every shadow was his form, lurking. The financial strain, the social isolation, the constant psychological pressure. It was all becoming too much. The lowest point, the moment I felt the last of my strength crumble, came on a cold, rainy night in October. I was awakened by a strange sound, a scraping, tearing noise from the backyard. I crept to the window, my body trembling, and looked down into my garden. In the blue-white glare of the security light, I saw him. Marcus Thorne. He wasn't just standing there. He was moving with a feverish intensity, tearing out my prize-winning rose bushes by the roots and casting them aside. He had a heavy bag with him, and he was pouring something white all over the soil, salting the earth, murdering the one place that had still felt like mine. I fumbled for my phone to call 911, my hands shaking too much to dial properly. By the time I got through to the dispatcher, he was gone. I raced downstairs and checked the security footage. The feed from the backyard camera was just static for a 10-minute window. The exact 10 minutes he was there. He had used a signal jammer. It was a professional, calculated act of destruction. I stood at my back door, looking out at the wreckage of my garden, the white salt glowing like frost on the dead earth. And I finally broke. The tears I had been holding back for months came in a gut-wrenching flood. He had won. He had successfully taken my peace, my business, my reputation, and now my sanctuary. I was alone, exhausted, and nearly broke. Selling seemed like the only option left. Surrendering was the only way to make it stop. I felt like a ghost in my own life, and he was the one holding the leash. All was lost. I spent the next few days in a fog of defeat, moving through my empty shop like a sleepwalker. I started boxing up books from the back room, the scent of paper and ink feeling like a final goodbye. The fight had gone out of me. Selling was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. I decided to start in the attic, the place where the oldest, most forgotten things were stored. It was a dusty tomb of my family's history, filled with cobweb-draped furniture and boxes that hadn't been opened in decades. As I shifted a stack of my father's old college textbooks, my hand brushed against a heavy, dark wood chest tucked away under the eaves. It was my grandfather's. I remembered seeing it as a child, but I was never allowed to touch it. It was locked with a small, tarnished brass key. On a whim, I went to my mother's old jewelry box, a place of tangled necklaces and stray earrings, and found a small bundle of antique keys tied with a faded ribbon. The third one I tried slid into the lock and turned with a satisfying click. As I lifted the heavy lid, the smell of cedar and old secrets filled the attic air. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were not treasures of gold or silver, but something far more valuable. There were stacks of letters tied in twine, several leather-bound journals, and a thick manila envelope. I sat there on the dusty floorboards, the single attic light bulb casting a halo around me, and I began to read my grandfather's journals. The man who emerged from those pages was not the villain Marcus Thorne had painted. Arthur Thompson was a thoughtful, kind, and sometimes troubled man. He wrote about his love for Willow Creek, his hopes for the bookstore, his worries about the world. And then I found the entries about Silas Thorne. They weren't nemesis, they were best friends. They had grown up together, worked in the logging camps together. My grandfather wrote with deep sorrow about Silas's sickness, his addiction to gambling. He documented how he had repeatedly bylaid Silas out, loaning him money he never expected to get back. The famous poker game was real, but it wasn't a swindle. It was an act of desperation. Silas, about to lose everything to dangerous loan sharks from out of town, begged Arthur to take the deed in a game, to hold it safe until he could get back on his feet. It was a last-ditch effort to keep the property out of the hands of men who would have taken it with violence. Then I opened the letters. They were from my grandfather to Silas's widow, sent for years after Silas passed away. With each letter was a money order. He was helping support the family his friend had left behind, trying to honor his memory. The narrative Marcus had spun, the foundation of his entire campaign against me, was a lie. A bitter myth passed down through a generation, blinded by resentment. But the final, irrefutable proof was in the manila envelope. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, brittle with age. It was a legally notarized document, signed in a shaky but clear hand by Silas Thorne himself. It stated that the transfer of the property to Arthur Thompson was legitimate, a sale made under personal duress to prevent a greater financial catastrophe, and that the debt was considered settled and fair. My grandfather hadn't been a thief. He had been a savior. A fire I thought had been extinguished roared back to life inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was a cold, clear certainty. I wasn't going to sell. I wasn't going to run. I was going to burn Marcus Thorne's lies to the ground in the most public way possible. I wouldn't fight him in a courtroom with lawyers. I would fight him in the court of public opinion, where he had waged his war against me. I spent the next 2 days planning. I made flyers and posted them all over town. Community meeting at the town hall, they read. An open discussion to address the recent controversy surrounding the quill and compass. All are welcome. I hand-delivered an invitation to the editor of the local paper, and of course, to Marcus Thorne himself. I found him sitting in his car, as always. I walked right up to the window and slid the flyer under his windshield wiper. He looked at me with a smug, triumphant expression, clearly believing this was my public surrender. Let him think that. The evening of the meeting, the town hall was packed. It felt like all of Willow Creek was there, their faces a mixture of curiosity, pity, and suspicion. I saw Mrs. Gable in the third row, looking worried. Sheriff Brody stood at the back, his arms crossed, a neutral but watchful presence. Marcus Thorne sat right in the front row, a smirk playing on his lips, ready to watch me crumble. I walked up to the podium on the small stage. A projector I'd borrowed from the high school was set up, aimed at a large white screen behind me. I took a deep breath, the silence in the room absolute. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady and clear. I know there has been a lot of talk these past few months. A lot of rumors, a lot of pain. You have heard a story about my family, about my home, and about my business. A story of a theft that happened long ago. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the crowd before they landed on Marcus. Tonight, I want to tell you a different story. The true story. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told them about two friends, Arthur and Silas. I read passages from my grandfather's journal, his words filled with compassion and concern for his friend. My voice quivered slightly as I read about his grief over Silas's struggles. Then I put the letters on the projector, one by one. The sight of my grandfather's handwriting and the copies of the money orders sent to the Thorne family sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. People were shifting in their seats, looking from the screen to Marcus, whose smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped glare. Marcus Thorne has told you his grandfather was cheated, I said, my voice gaining strength. He has told you that my family's legacy is built on a lie. The truth is, his story is the lie. And then, for the finale, I placed the notarized document signed by Silas Thorne on the projector. The words appeared, large and undeniable, on the screen behind me. Silas Thorne's own signature, confirming the legitimacy of the entire transaction. My grandfather wasn't a thief, I declared, my voice ringing through the hall. He was a good man who tried to save his friend from ruin. The only person trying to steal this property is the man sitting in the front row, who has used a twisted family story to harass me, to destroy my business, and to try and bully me out of my home. A collective gasp went through the room. All eyes turned to Marcus. He shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. Lies. These are forgeries, he sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. The proof was right there for everyone to see. Sheriff Brody began walking slowly down the center aisle towards him. The game was over. Marcus, utterly humiliated and exposed, saw the tide of the entire town turn against him in an instant. He shoved his way through the crowd and fled the hall, a chorus of angry shouts following him out into the night. The aftermath was like the sun breaking through after a long and brutal storm. The next morning, Marcus Thorne's dark green sedan was gone. He had vanished as quickly as he had appeared. Sheriff Brody informed me that he had left town overnight and that the frivolous lawsuit had been officially withdrawn. It was over, but the change in Willow Creek was palpable. The Quill and Compass was suddenly flooded with people. They didn't just come to buy books, they came to apologize. Mrs. Gable hugged me with tears in her eyes, telling me she never should have doubted me. Others came in, their faces filled with shame, admitting they had been taken in by his story. They brought flowers for my ruined garden, offered to help me till the soil and replant. My business didn't just recover, it thrived. I had become more than just Clara Me Thompson, the quiet bookstore owner. I had faced down a bully, defended my family's honor, and reclaimed my story in front of everyone. I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I wasn't the same woman who had pulled down her shades in fear. I was the woman who had stood on a stage and spoken the truth, loud and clear. My life in Willow Creek settled into a new normal. It was still peaceful, still measured in seasons, but it was richer now, layered with the knowledge of my own resilience and the reaffirmed bonds of my community. I replanted my garden, and the roses that grew back were more vibrant and beautiful than ever before. I felt a sense of peace that was deeper than the one I had before, because this peace had been earned, not just inherited. About a month later, a package arrived at the shop. It was a small, heavy box with no return address. Cautiously, I opened it. Inside, wrapped in silk paper, was a book. It was an incredibly rare, first edition copy of East of Eden, a book I had mentioned once in a newspaper interview years ago as the one I would most love to own. My heart beat a little faster as I lifted it out. Tucked inside the front cover was a simple, typewritten note. It read, "My great-grandfather was one of the lone sharks your grandfather saved Silas Thorne from. He was a dangerous man, and had he gotten that property, my family's history would have been much darker." Arthur Thompson's act of friendship didn't just save one family, it saved others in ways he never knew. Thank you for setting the record straight. Some stories deserve to be told correctly. I stood there in the quiet of my bookshop, holding the heavy volume in my hands, a testament to a past I had only just discovered. The revenge I had exacted on Marcus Thorne had been about clearing my family's name and reclaiming my life. But this was something else entirely. It was a quiet echo from the past, a confirmation that goodness can ripple through generations, just as hatred can. My grandfather's act of kindness, buried for over 60 years, had finally found its way back to me, not as a source of conflict, but as a gift. And in my small, peaceful world, that felt like the most poetic justice of all,